Welcome to Imaginary Lands, the works of award-winning author and storyteller Bobby Pell. Today's selection, The White Seal Maiden, is a twist to the legends of the Selkies, or the Seal people of Scotland, written by Jane Yolen.
The Seal people. Coira, noira, noira, nero. Coira, noira, noira, nero. Coira, noira, noira, near, allow you run. Coira, noira, nero. Murdoch was a fisherman who lived on the coast of Scotland. He loved his life, and he was a fine fisherman, but there was one thing wrong. The man was lonely. He was in his 40s now, and in his 20s even he had been considered quite a catch. But there had been no woman to take his heart, to steal his affections, and so he had remained a bachelor. This day, as he came in from the sea, he watched as his fellow fishermen came in as well, and he noticed the shoreline, the whitewashed homes with the thatched roofs dotting the hillside, that there would be warm hearth fires shining for those men, a warm stew under those flames, waiting to fill their bellies after a chilling day at sea. But Murdoch knew his home. It was dark and lonely. And that night, as he decided to see what would happen with his life if he made other choices, he felt so restless in his sleep that he had odd dreams. In fact, he dreamed of seals, all shapes and sizes and colors, and he felt so restless when he woke up the next morning, his bones aching from the lack of sleep, that he decided that he would not go down to fish today. No, he would take some time for himself. He made himself a small lunch, and then he went down to a solitary stretch of beach where there were some boulders, and he sat himself down among them and looked out to sea. He pondered his dream. He had always loved seals. He thought them soulful creatures, and he thought it such a crime, the way that they were bludgeoned to death for different products for man. He felt they had a right to live just as much as he did. So he sat there all day, though, wondering how would his heart ever be full. Then, as the sun ran its course through the sky and the moon began to rise, it was a full moon this night. He decided he would wait and watch as the moonlight broke into beautiful, transparent, twinkling stars upon the waves. Yet then suddenly he saw something large and white coming towards the shore. It was a head cresting the waves, and he realized soon enough it was a great white seal. It was coming straight for him, and so, not wanting to disturb or frighten the creature, he quickly gathered up his luncheon things, and he got behind the boulder, and he hid there very quietly. He watched as the seal came to shore, and then it did something miraculous. It stood on its hind legs. It stood tall and erect. It stretched its short fins out, and taking one of those fins, pulled it over the front of its face and pulled back the hood of that fur. And there he saw a beautiful woman, the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. And he knew now he was watching the transformation of a Selkie, the seal people. He watched her as she let the hood fall back as if it were just a cape. And then she pulled at the arms one after the other as if simply taking off a fur coat. It went down her lithe body until it pooled at her feet where she gently stepped out of it. And then in all her splendor, her long hair flowed in the sea breezes around her, covering her nakedness. She went over to another boulder, not too far from where he sat, and she looked out to sea. He had heard that Selkies used to sing haunting songs, sometimes heard by fishermen late at night. He had never been so lucky, but his luck now was about to turn. She began to sing. Coira, noira, Coira, noira, noira, nero. Coira, noira, noira, near, lyron. Coira, noira, nero. And as she sang, she looked out to sea, and there, as Murdoch watched, were the heads of seals. There were maple brown ones and the gray long-nosed ones. And as the seals came to shore, each one of them did the same thing that the great white had done. They pulled the hood over their head, revealing smiling, beautiful women. Each one let it drop down to their feet and stepped gently out of it, and then piled their skins one upon the other until there was a large pile sitting on the sand. They then went over to the great white, and the seal maiden there smiled and laughed with her charges as they all danced and frolicked around her, and then laughed and played in the waves. Murdoch thought he would never in his life see anything else so magical and wondrous, and not again wanting to frighten the group, he sat there quietly and watched all these beautiful women, so happy, so content, their life in the sea, and their night, one night a month under a full moon, here on land where they could feel their humanity. Yes, Murdoch was fortunate. Well, the sun began to rise as the moon ran its courses, and as it did, he watched as each of the maidens now came, and they sifted through the pile till they found their foreskin. And they stepped into it, pulled it up over their hips, over their legs, one arm, then the other into the short fins, pulling the hood over their faces once more. Then they would go down to the edge of the shore, right where the water was coming in, and they would kneel down and let the water baptize them back into their seal form, and the fur coat, as if invisible fingers, was neatly stitched back together, and then their lithe bodies swam gracefully into the waves. All save one, the White Seal Maiden. She remained. Well, he was stunned, and as the other seals now disappeared into the waves, he found himself standing and going over to where that beautiful white fur lay on the sand. He picked it up to her, and he went over to the boulder where she sat and held it out to her. "Yours," he said. But she got down off the boulder, and she pushed it back towards him. She said, "Nay, me. Yours." Well, it didn't take much prodding for him to see, well, this woman is giving herself to me. What a fortunate man I am. And so he took his coat and wrapped it around her, and they carried the great white skin back to his home. He called her Sel, and they were married within the week. And within the first year, she bore him a son. And now, every night when he came home from fishing, he would see there was a hearth fire in his window, and he knew his wife was there, waiting with one of her special soups that only she could make to warm his belly. In the second year, she gave him another son, and a third, and a fourth, and a fifth, and a sixth, until by the time the 7th year ended, she had borne him 7 healthy, beautiful sons. Now the years rolled by. The sons learned the trade of their father. They loved their parents dearly. They played in the surf, and they took the trade of fishing very seriously. On the morning of the eldest son's 21st birthday, the weather had turned. Murdoch stood at the window looking out. "Hey, boys, it's a rough sea out there this night. I believe it's going to take all of us to make the sails do as we wish. We don't want to fall in the sea. I'll need your help, all of you for certain." But the eldest stood up to him and said, "Nay, father, this day we stay with our mother." "Nay? Why, Sel, what kind of boys have you raised that they say nay to their father?" And suddenly Murdoch became angry. He says, "I can't go out in that kind of wind and bits of rain, not all alone." But she rose and she kissed him on the cheek, and said, "Nay, this day the boys stay with me." "Fine," he said. "That's absolutely fine." And he slammed the door shut on his way out, and it rattled the doorway and almost loosened the stone that was above. For in that space above the door, when he and Sel had first come home, they had carved out a space for her to have her sealskin and then placed a stone in front of it. He never wanted her to feel as if she were a prisoner on land. He wanted her to always have a choice. But now all these years had passed, and the stone had remained in its place, unmoved. Murdoch went down to the shore, and he got one of his smaller curraghs, and he went out into the ocean. Well, it seemed that the sky was matching the anger in his heart, for there were skillet gray clouds that were heavy and low, and he knew that it wasn't a day to be fraught with fishing at all. No good catches this day. And so he came back home. And as he did, even though it was still daylight, he thought there could have been a little bit of something coming out of that window. But the window was dark. And Murdoch feared that something had happened to his family. So he rushed back, and as soon as he got to the house, he flung open the door, and sure enough, it was dark. There was no fire in the fireplace, no candles lit, no laughter of his children, no Sel. And then he turned, and he looked above the doorway, and there, the stone no longer remained, and all that met him was an empty hole. Her sealskin was gone. Before he knew it, he ran back down with all his might to that lonely stretch of land where he had first met her, where those Selkies had first come. And as he got there, he looked at the shoreline, and he saw something that gave him a fear that pierced his heart deeper than anything ever could. He saw a pile there on the sand. It wasn't a pile of seal fur skins. No, it was something much more terrifying. It was the clothing of his sons. He knelt down beside them and held them up to his face. "Oh, my sons, my boys, where are you?" And he cried as he looked out to the waves. And suddenly he saw what he had not seen now in over 21 years. He saw the head of the great white seal heading towards open sea, and behind her 7 strong gray seal pups. He called out each one of his sons' names, and as they heard it, they turned, they faced him and barked out their new seal name, and then popped below the watery surface, entering their new home. When all 7 boys were now out of sight, Sel turned one last time in her seal form and looked at the man that she had loved, and then she too disappeared beneath the waves. Murdoch did not know how to feel. Anger, hurt, despair, betrayal, all of these things mixing in him. And as he stood and he looked out to sea, he suddenly was taken back to that night when he met the love of his life, his dearest Sel. And he remembered something. There had only been women that day. Seal women. And he knew enough about communities that if there is not male and female, the community will die. He thought for a moment, and he recognized now what Sel had done. She had left her home and come ashore in order to save her community of seals, and now it was time for them to give back. He recognized her sacrifice as a tear streamed down his face. He went back to his home, and that night he dreamed, and in his dream he heard her singing one more time. Coira, noira, noira, nero. Coira, noira, noira, nero. Coira, noira, noira, near, allow you run. Coira, noira, Ronnie road. Thank you.